The catering uniform smelled like someone else's perfume. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled it from the plastic wrap in the back hallway of the Harrington estate. That faint floral ghost of whoever had worn it before me. Something expensive and completely out of place against the industrial detergent underneath. I pressed the collar flat with my palm and told myself it didn't matter. It was a uniform. I was staff. Nobody at this party was going to be looking at me anyway. That was, of course, before everything changed. The Harrington estate sat on the north edge of Atherton, California, tucked behind iron gates and rows of Italian cypress trees that stood like soldiers along a gravel driveway 300 feet long. I'd driven past places like this my whole life, and never imagined setting foot inside one. Now here I was, threading a tray of champagne flutes through a crowd of people who wore more money on their wrists than I made in 6 months. The event was private. Some kind of investment celebration, the agency told me. Wear your hair up, keep your eyes down, smile but not too much. I had the instructions memorized. I was good at making myself small. I'd had practice. The ballroom, if you could even call it that. It was more like a living room that had swallowed 3 other living rooms. Was already thick with the kind of noise that comes from 100 people pretending to be relaxed. Laughter a half-second too loud. Compliments delivered with the precision of business transactions. A string quartet in the far corner playing something classical that nobody was actually listening to. The chandeliers overhead threw fractured light across everything, and the whole room smelled of orchids and leather and something I couldn't name. Something that didn't belong to the flowers or the furniture. I moved through the edges of the crowd the way I always did. Careful, peripheral, invisible. Tray balanced, smile ready, eyes tracking the nearest exit out of habit, rather than intention. Champagne? The man in front of me barely looked up from his conversation. He took a glass without acknowledgement. I moved on. That was fine. That was the job. I was near the far corridor, heading back toward the kitchen for a refill, when I heard it. Or rather, when I felt it. A shift in the room's atmosphere that I couldn't explain immediately, the way the air changes before a thunderstorm, some pressure adjustment too subtle for the conscious mind to name, but impossible for the body to ignore. The laughter didn't stop, but it dimmed somehow, like someone had turned a dial a single degree to the left. The quartet kept playing, but something was different. I slowed down. There were more people near the main entrance than there had been a minute ago. Or rather, the same people had drifted in that direction without seeming to notice they were doing it. A cluster of men in dark suits had appeared near the double doors, positioned with a looseness that was actually very deliberate. The kind of casual arrangement that means the opposite of casual. I counted 4 of them without meaning to. Then I saw the 5th. He wasn't standing near the doors. He was already inside the room, already still, already watching, and I don't know how I'd missed him because he was exactly the kind of person you don't miss. Tall for the room. Dark suit, no tie, collar open exactly 1 button. Younger than I expected, given the way the space seemed to reorganize itself around him. He wasn't looking at anyone in particular. He was simply present, the way a fixed point is present. Everything else moving relative to him. Someone nearby murmured something I didn't catch. The woman next to me set her champagne glass down on my tray without asking and took a step backward without meaning to. I needed to move. I was standing in the middle of the corridor like an idiot with a nearly empty tray, and the kitchen was 30 feet away, and this was absolutely not my concern. I turned toward the kitchen. I don't know exactly how it happened. Later I would reconstruct it a dozen times and never land on a satisfying explanation. My heel caught something. The edge of the carpet runner, a slight ridge where the hardwood met the threshold. It doesn't matter. And the tray went sideways. The remaining glasses didn't shatter dramatically. They made a small, polite sound, a crystalline crash that was somehow worse for being contained, and cold champagne arced across the floor in a wide crescent. 1 glass rolled and came to a stop at someone's foot, Silence. Not complete silence, the quartet continued, oblivious. But the human noise of the room stuttered, and I felt every pair of eyes in my immediate vicinity locate me at once. My face went hot. My hands were still extended from the tray position, now holding nothing, the empty tray hanging at a useless angle. I crouched immediately to begin gathering the stems, which was the right instinct practically and a terrible instinct socially because it put me on the floor, and from the floor there is truly nowhere to hide. Someone get her a towel. The voice belonged to a man I recognized as one of the estate's senior coordinators. His tone was not unkind, but it carried that particular flavor of embarrassment on behalf of. The kind that makes the embarrassed party feel worse, not better. I gathered the glass stems. My throat was tight. I was not going to cry. It was champagne. It was carpet. This was recoverable. Then I heard someone else. A different voice entirely. One of the guests. A heavy-set man in a gray suit whose name I didn't know. Say something low and mean to the man beside him. He didn't say it quietly enough. Something about the help not being able to handle a tray. A short sound of laughter from the side. I stayed on the floor a beat too long. I know I did. Because something in me needed a second to absorb that particular variety of humiliation. The public kind. The kind that happens in a room full of people who will all have forgotten it by morning while you carry it home in your chest. I stood up. I smoothed my uniform with my free hand. I was going to look straight ahead and walk to the kitchen, and that was the end of it. That was the plan. But when I looked up, I found that I was not looking at the kitchen. I was looking across the room at the man who had arrived with 4 others, the one who had rearranged the room's gravity by simply standing in it. And he was looking directly at me. Not at the mess, not at the tray, at me. His expression gave nothing away. Dark eyes, steady, with the quality of patience that isn't passive. The kind that has made decisions and is simply waiting for events to confirm them. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't reacting. He was watching, with a focus so complete that the 30 feet of party noise between us felt suddenly irrelevant. I looked away first. I always look away first. I made it to the kitchen. I set the broken stems in the collection bin, accepted a replacement tray from the catering manager with a quiet apology that she waved off, and stood for a moment at the prep counter with my palms flat against the cold stainless steel, waiting for my heartbeat to normalize. Around me, the kitchen noise continued. Orders being called, plates sliding, the organized chaos that backstages every elegant event. Nobody in here cared about a drop tray. In here, I was just another set of hands moving through a shift. I took a breath. Then another. I picked up the new tray and went back out. The man in the dark suit had moved. He was now across the room, near the tall windows that looked out onto the lit garden, speaking quietly with a silver-haired man who had the posture of someone accustomed to authority and the expression of someone who had, for this conversation, temporarily relinquished it. One of the 4 men who'd arrived with him stood 12 feet away, positioned toward the room, not the window, watching the crowd. Not in a dramatic way, in a professional way. The gray-suited man who had made the comment was still nearby, still in conversation, still entirely comfortable. I moved to the left side of the room, the long way around. A woman near the floral arrangement caught my eye. A guest, older, in a green dress, and gave me a small, sympathetic look. I returned it with a neutral smile and kept moving. 3 hours. I just needed 3 more hours. I was refilling a guest glass near the second seating cluster when I felt it again. That same pressure shift, that same recalibration of the air around me. I didn't understand it immediately. The room's noise had continued at its usual register. Nothing visible had changed. But the woman across from me had stopped mid-sentence and was looking at something just past my shoulder. I turned. He was standing 8 feet away. Not approaching. Already arrived. Already still. The way he moved, I understood now, was the thing nobody talked about. Not dramatic, not showy, simply direct. As if space rearranged itself to accommodate him rather than the other way around. His eyes were on me. "You work for the agency?" he said. His English was clean, accented lightly, with a cadence that suggested he chose his words with care, and said considerably fewer of them than most people. My grip tightened on the tray. Yes, he held my gaze for a moment, just a moment, with that same quality of deliberate patience I'd seen from across the room. Then he looked toward the area near the entrance where the gray-suited man was now laughing loudly at his own joke. When he looked back at me, something in his expression had made a decision. "Stay in this section for the rest of the evening," he said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't explained. He turned and walked back toward the windows. I stood there with a champagne tray and a feeling I couldn't name. Something between confusion and the strange, electric discomfort of being truly seen by someone you do not understand. 3 tables away, one of the dark-suited men was watching me. He looked away when I made eye contact. I exhaled slowly and returned to my route. The orchestra played on. I stayed in the section he told me to stay in. I told myself it was because it was the easier side of the room. Fewer clusters of guests to navigate, better access to the kitchen corridor, less carpet to maneuver around. I told myself it was practical, a coincidence of logistics. I told myself a lot of things in the next 40 minutes while I moved through that specific corner of the ballroom with my tray and my neutral smile, and not one of those things was the truth. The truth was that I didn't know how to do anything else. Something about the way he had said it, not unkind, not threatening, simply certain, had settled into me like an instruction my body had already decided to follow before my mind could object. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I was not the kind of person who followed the instructions of strangers at parties. I was not the kind of person who found that particular quality, that absolute, undecorated certainty, anything other than uncomfortable. Except it wasn't only uncomfortable. And that was the part I kept not thinking about. Hyun-woo. I didn't know his name yet. At that point, he was still just the man by the window, the one who had arrived and rearranged the room's weather. I would learn his name later, from a conversation I wasn't meant to hear, and when I did, it would slot into place with the particular neatness of information that has been true all along. For now, I watched him the way you watch something you're pretending not to watch. He spent a long time near the tall windows. The silver-haired man from before had been replaced by 2 others, younger, wearing the careful expressions of people delivering information rather than having a conversation. Hyun-woo listened without interrupting. He asked something short, once. They answered at length. Whatever they said, his expression didn't shift. He simply absorbed it the way deep water absorbs things, completely, without visible disturbance. The 4 men around him moved in a pattern so subtle it looked like nothing. One would drift toward the entrance. Another would rotate to cover the space left behind. It was choreography performed at a frequency most people couldn't detect, but I was watching from the periphery, from the staff invisible zone where no one bothers to perform, and I could see it. Whatever this man was, he had not come to this party to celebrate an investment. That thought arrived with a quietness that should have alarmed me more than it did. I was collecting empty glasses near the east wall when I became aware of the gray-suited man again. His name, I'd gathered from nearby conversation, was Denton. And Denton had the social energy of someone who had decided, midway through his 3rd drink, that the most interesting thing in the room was whatever he hadn't paid enough attention to yet. He was migrating. Slowly, with the unsteady confidence of a man who considers his own comfort the most relevant variable in any situation. He was migrating toward me. I adjusted my route, moved left, angled toward the next table. He adjusted too, not quite deliberately, or maybe deliberately enough. It was hard to tell with men like Denton. They rarely made decisions they had to admit to themselves. "You're the one who dropped the tray earlier." He said it like an observation, but observations don't come with that particular edge. "Yes." I didn't stop moving. "Can I get you anything?" "Relax." He said it the way people say relax when they mean the opposite, when they mean hold still. I'm not going to complain about it. It was funny, honestly. A pause. "You looked like a deer." I picked up 2 empty flutes from a side table. My jaw was tight. "Champagne, or something from the bar. You know, my company actually uses the same agency." He was speaking to my profile now, because I was still moving, and he was keeping pace. "For our corporate events. I could make sure you're not scheduled for those if you want. After tonight." Another pause, weighted with the implication he wanted me to catch. "Or I could make sure you are." I stopped. Not because of fear. It was something older than fear. The fatigue of recognizing a specific type of man and knowing that every available response is already categorized in his mind. Comply, and it confirms something. Refuse, and it confirms something else. Disappear, and he finds you again later when there are fewer witnesses. "I'm just here to work," I said. Quiet, steady. "Sure you are." He smiled. "It didn't reach anything." "That's fine." "I just thought—" "She said she's working." The voice came from my left. Not loud, not aggressive. Simply there, like something that had always been there and had finally chosen to be heard. The same cadence I'd encountered earlier. That careful, minimal quality of a man who says only what he needs to say, because he is certain it will be sufficient. Denton turned. I watched him turn. Watched the social confidence on his face go through a rapid and involuntary reassessment, the way a flame responds to wind, not extinguished immediately, but changed, made uncertain. His eyes moved from me to the man beside me, to the space around the man beside me, which contained 2 of the dark-suited figures at a distance that was close enough. "I was just—" Denton started. "I know what you were doing." Still not loud, still not aggressive. But the temperature of it, the absolute lack of any social cushioning, the way it landed with no echo, it was not a statement that invited response. Denton laughed. A small, reflexive sound, the kind that happens when the body defaults to a social behavior the situation no longer supports. "Sure," he said. "Sorry." And then, because there was nothing else available to him, he left, moved away with the practiced ease of a man reclassifying the last 2 minutes as something that hadn't mattered. I stood there. Hyunwoo was beside me, not close enough to touch, not close enough to be improper, but close enough that I could see, for the first time, the exact quality of his stillness. It wasn't absence. It was the opposite. It was the stillness of something at full capacity, at complete readiness, that has simply chosen not to move. "Thank you," I said. My voice came out more careful than I intended. He didn't say "you're welcome." He looked at me in that direct, undecorated way. The look that didn't perform anything, didn't apologize for itself, didn't require me to perform anything back. And then he said, "What's your name?" "Chloe." Something registered in his face. Not a smile exactly. A slight shift in the geography of it. Something that acknowledged the information without making a production of the acknowledgement. "Chloe." He said it once, like filing it somewhere. Then, without introduction, without any of the social scaffolding that usually surrounds a moment like this, he said, "How long is your shift?" "Until 11. He nodded once, looked out over the room the way he had all evening, comprehensive, unreadable, like a man checking a perimeter. Then back to me. "Stay visible," he said, which made no sense, because staff is supposed to be invisible, That is the entire point. But he said it with the same quality of certainty as everything else. And before I could ask what he meant, he was already walking away, back toward the windows, back toward the silver-haired man who had reappeared with new papers in hand. One of the dark-suited men took a position 12 feet to my left. I looked at him. He looked forward. I was being watched over. The realization arrived without drama, quiet and enormous and entirely strange. Not watched in the way Denton had been watching me. That calculation, that inventory. This was different. This was the way you station someone at a door you care about. I was a door he had decided to care about, and I had no reference for that. No category in my experience where a man like this made that kind of decision about a woman like me. I went back to work, but the room felt different now. Or rather, I felt different in it. Something infinitesimally altered in how I moved through the space, some small recalibration I couldn't fully justify. The tray felt lighter. The edges of the crowd felt less compressive. When a guest spoke to me without looking up, the small erosion of that gesture didn't reach as far as it usually did. 11 o'clock. 4 more hours. Around 9, the party shifted into a later gear, some guests departing, others settling deeper into conversations, the music quieting slightly to accommodate the reduced volume of voices. The kitchen grew less frantic. I had a 7-minute break near the prep station and drank half a bottle of water and didn't think about anything in particular. When I came back out, Hyunwoo was near the main entrance, speaking to the silver-haired man one final time. The conversation was brief. The silver-haired man extended his hand. Hyunwoo looked at it for a half-second before shaking it. Not rudely, but with the timing of a man who makes that calculation fresh each time rather than reflexively. Then one of the dark-suited figures said something close to his ear. Hyunwoo turned his head, looked across the room, looked at me. I was 30 feet away, holding a tray, and the 30 feet meant nothing. He said something to the man beside him, short 2 or 3 words, and the man nodded and stepped back. Then Hyunwoo walked toward me. Not quickly, not slowly, with the pace of someone who is always exactly where he intended to be. He stopped in front of me and said nothing for a moment, which should have been uncomfortable, and was something else entirely. "I have to leave," he said. I didn't know why he was telling me. I didn't know what the correct response was. "Okay," I said. "Someone will come to you before you leave tonight." He paused. "Let them." And then, before I could locate a single coherent question, he turned and walked toward the door. The 4 men consolidated around him with the practiced ease of a tide. The room shifted, not loudly, just that same barometric change in reverse, the weather moving out. The doors closed. I stood with my tray and the echo of an instruction I didn't understand, and wouldn't understand until much later. Let them. Let who? Do what? I went back to work. The last hour of the shift passed the way the end of long shifts always do. Slowly, then all at once. By 10:30, the ballroom had thinned considerably. The string quartet had packed their instruments, and the remaining guests had consolidated into 2 or 3 tight conversational clusters that would probably outlast the staff's patience by another hour at least. I was on my 4th loop of the East Corridor, collecting the last scattered glasses, when the catering manager pulled me aside near the kitchen entrance and told me I could start breaking down my station. 15 minutes early. Small mercy. I was grateful for it. My feet ached in the way that becomes invisible during a shift, and suddenly unbearable the moment permission to stop arrives. I changed out of the uniform in the small staff room off the back hallway, back into my own jeans, my own gray sweater, my own shoes. And for a moment I just sat on the bench with my bag in my lap and my eyes closed and let the silence of the room be what it was. The party noise bled faintly through the wall, distant, muffled, already belonging to another world. I thought about Hyunwoo. I didn't want to think about Hyunwoo. Thinking about Hyunwoo felt like pressing on a bruise. Not quite pain, not quite relief, but something that confirmed the bruise was real. Someone will come to you before you leave tonight. Let them. I had turned those 2 sentences over for the last 2 hours and arrived at nothing that fully satisfied me. It could mean anything. It probably meant something I wasn't equipped to process. I stood up, shouldered my bag, told myself I was going to walk out the staff entrance, drive home, eat whatever was left in my refrigerator, and sleep for 9 hours. That was the plan. The staff entrance was a side door that opened onto a narrow path between the estate's main building and the garden wall, leading out to the secondary parking area where staff vehicles were corralled. I pushed through the door into the night air, cold, clean, carrying the faint scent of the cypress trees and something floral from the garden, and stopped. There was a man standing at the edge of the path, not one of the catering staff, not a guest who'd wandered. He was one of the dark-suited figures from earlier. I recognized the quality of his posture before I recognized anything specific about him. He was looking at his phone, or pretending to, and when the door opened, he looked up without surprise. "Ms. Chloe," he said. Not a question. "Mr. Hyunwoo would like to speak with you." My bag strap tightened under my hand. He left. Yes. No elaboration. I looked at the man. He was maybe 30, with a face that gave away approximately nothing, and the general bearing of someone who had been trained to be an extension of someone else's decisions. He wasn't threatening me. He wasn't blocking my path. He was simply there, delivering a message with the calm efficiency of a person who doesn't expect the message to be refused. Let them. I thought about walking past him. I mapped the route in my head, past him, down the path, through the secondary gate, to my car, done. I could do that. There was nothing stopping me physically. I was a free person who had just finished a catering shift and had absolutely no obligation to anyone at this party, least of all a man who had left an hour ago. "Where?" I said. "There's a car at the front of the estate." I exhaled through my nose, looked up at the cypress trees for a moment, their dark shapes against a sky that held no stars tonight, just low cloud, the ambient glow of a city leaking upward, the specific kind of California night that looks like it's thinking about rain and never commits. "Give me 5 minutes," I said. He nodded once and looked back at his phone. The car was a dark Mercedes, idling at the far end of the front driveway, with a patience that felt expensive. The man from the path had walked me to it without hovering, a careful distance, enough to indicate direction without coercion. And when I reached the rear door, he opened it and stood aside. Inside the car, it smelled like leather and something else, something faintly familiar. And it took me a moment to understand that the something else was the same thing I'd noticed at the party, that unnameable quality that I was starting to associate specifically with him. Hyunwoo was already there. He was sitting on the far side, looking forward rather than at me, his posture carrying that same controlled stillness from the party. No jacket now, just the dark shirt, collar still open, one arm resting along the window line. In the dim interior of the car, he looked different, not less contained, but closer to something, more present in a way the crowd of the party hadn't allowed. The door closed behind me. "You could have called," I said, because I needed to say something and that was what came out. "I don't have your number." He said it without irony. "You could have left a note." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. An acknowledgement that I'd said something worth a half smile, filed and set aside. "How was the rest of your shift?" "Fine." I set my bag on my lap. "Why am I in this car?" He turned to look at me then, directly, the way he did everything, without the performance of transition. "Because I wanted to make sure you got home safely." I stared at him. "You don't know me." "No." "You don't know where I live." "No." A pause. I'm not going to your home, Chloe. I'm going to make sure you reach your car without anyone following you. The word following landed in the car with a weight I hadn't prepared for. Following me, I repeated. He looked forward again. Denton has made certain choices in his career. Some of those choices intersect with mine. He knows who I am. He saw me speak to you tonight. A brief pause, the kind that contains more than it shows. Men like that make decisions about women when they feel they've been embarrassed in front of someone they need to impress. I sat with that. The party. Hyunwoo appearing beside me. Denton's expression doing that rapid recalculation. The way he'd laughed the small, reflexive laugh and walked away. So I'm a problem for you, I said, not bitterly, just trying to locate the geography of the situation. You're not a problem for me. His voice was even. You're a person who did nothing wrong tonight, and I don't want you to experience consequences for that. It was the most direct thing anyone had said to me in months, maybe longer. It arrived without softening, without the social wrapping paper that makes honest statements palatable by making them slightly less honest. He just said it, the way he said everything, without negotiation. I didn't know what to do with it, so I looked out the window. The estate's driveway was sliding past. Cypress trees, low lighting, gravel giving way to the iron gate, which opened as the car approached without anyone visibly operating it. Then the road, the ordinary California road, and the distance between the Harrington estate and the rest of the world, collapsing in the span of a breath. What do you do? I asked. It was not the right question. It was the only question that fit in my mouth. Business, he said. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have available right now. I turned to look at him. He was watching the road, his profile clean and still. And something about the honesty of that. I don't have a better answer to give you, and I'm telling you so instead of lying. Made something in my chest do something complicated. You intervened tonight, I said. For a stranger, that's not nothing. No, he agreed. It's not nothing. The car moved through the quiet streets that ringed Atherton's edges, heading back toward the parking area where my car sat. I'd mentioned it in the driveway when the suited man had asked. 5 minutes. Maybe less. The interior of the car was very quiet, the city outside a blur of low lights and empty intersections at this hour. What did you tell your man? I asked, when you looked at me from across the room. Before you left. He turned his head slowly. You saw that. I see more than people think I do. He considered that. The car turned, and the amber of a streetlight passed across his face in one slow stroke and vanished. I told him to make sure no one spoke to you after I left. The thing in my chest did it again. Nobody spoke to me after you left, I said. I know. The parking area appeared ahead. My car, a 7-year-old Honda Civic, silver, deeply unremarkable, was exactly where I'd left it, alone in the section where catering staff had been directed. The Mercedes pulled to a smooth stop nearby, and for a moment neither of us moved. I should say thank you. I should say goodnight. I should open the door and walk to my car and drive home and file this entire evening in the category of things that happened once and mean nothing significant. I work Saturdays, I said instead. The agency usually posts the assignments Thursday night. I don't know where that came from. Some part of me that had decided, without consulting the rest, that it wanted to be known. He turned to look at me fully. That same steady, undecorated attention. The look that didn't take anything, just received what was offered. Chloe, he said. My name, again in that same way. Filed somewhere careful. Yes? He reached into his jacket, which was folded on the seat beside him, I realized, and produced a plain card. No logo. Just a number, printed simply. He held it out. I took it. Our fingers didn't touch. If anything feels wrong before Thursday, he said, call that number. And if nothing feels wrong? The half smile again. Warmer this time, or maybe I was just adjusting to the temperature of it. Then call it anyway. I got out of the car. The night air was cold, and the cypress smell was gone, replaced by the ordinary smell of asphalt and the distant whisper of a freeway. I walked to my car without looking back. I unlocked it, got in, set my bag on the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The Mercedes hadn't moved yet. It waited until my engine turned over. Then, and only then, it pulled quietly out of the lot and disappeared into the dark. I called the number on Wednesday. Not because anything felt wrong. Because I'd spent 4 days turning that card over in my fingers until the edges softened slightly. And because Thursday was tomorrow. And because I had been honest with myself enough, finally, quietly, alone in my apartment on a Wednesday evening with leftover pasta going cold on the counter, to admit that waiting for something to feel wrong was just a more acceptable story than the true one. The true one was simpler and harder. I wanted to hear his voice. It rang twice. Chloe. He picked up knowing it was me, which meant the number on the card was one-directional. Only my calls would be identified. Only I had been given it. That understanding arrived a half second after I heard my name and settled somewhere between flattered and overwhelmed. Nothing's wrong, I said immediately. A pause. I know. Then you know why I called. Yes. Another pause. Shorter. Are you free Friday evening? I looked at my cold pasta. At my apartment, which was small and clean and full of the specific kind of quiet that accumulates when a person spends most of their time working and most of their remainder time recovering from working. Yes, I said. I'll send someone for you at 7. Not, I'll pick you up. I'll send someone. The distinction registered. He was a man who sent people, who arranged things through layers, who did not simply appear at a door without deliberate intention. You could just text me the address, I said. I could. He didn't say he would. He sent someone at 7. The restaurant was in San Francisco, a 40-minute drive from my apartment in Redwood City, which meant the driver, a different man from the one at the estate, navigated the 101, while I sat in the back of another dark car and watched the bay appear and disappear between buildings and tried to arrange my face into something that resembled composure. I was wearing the nicest thing I owned that still felt like myself, a deep burgundy dress, simple, with a neckline that wasn't trying too hard. I'd spent 20 minutes arguing with my own reflection about it, and then decided that was enough time to give to the question. The restaurant had no sign outside, just a door, dark wood, with a small light above it. The kind of place that doesn't need to advertise, because everyone who is meant to find it already knows where it is. A man inside, not dark-suited, but carrying the same quality of deliberate quietness, led me through a dining room that was warm and low-lit, and only about a third full, to a corner table that was set apart from the others by distance and a slight change in the room's acoustics. Hyunwoo stood when I approached. That small thing, the standing, undid something careful I'd been constructing all week. It was such an ordinary gesture, and he did it with such uncalculated naturalness, no performance in it, just the act of acknowledging that I had arrived and that my arrival mattered. You look, he started. Don't, I said, and then immediately, sorry, you can. That half smile. You look like yourself, he said. I meant that as a complete sentence. I sat down. He sat down. A server appeared with water and a quiet recitation of what was available, and Hyunwoo listened without looking at the menu because he didn't need one, and ordered for both of us with a brief question in my direction. Do you eat fish? And when I said yes, it was done. You looked me up, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And? And you've worked for the agency for 2 years. Before that, hospitality management at a hotel in Palo Alto. Before that, 2 years of business school you left in the second year. He said it without judgment, just information he had filed. The school part surprised me. I would have guessed you finished. I felt a complicated warmth at that. I ran out of money, I said, not motivation. He nodded once, the way he nodded. Not performatively, just receiving the fact and placing it correctly. I had someone check on Denton, he added. The transition so clean it took me a moment to follow it. He won't be using your agency again, or any agency that shares their network. I looked at him. You did that. Yes. Without telling me. I'm telling you now. I didn't know whether to be unsettled or grateful. The honest answer was both, in proportions I couldn't cleanly separate. That's a significant thing to do for someone you've had one conversation with. He looked at me across the table and said nothing for a moment, in that way he had of letting silence do the work that other people used words for. Then, I don't do things by accident, Chloe. When I decide something, I decide it. The restaurant moved quietly around us. Somewhere behind me a couple laughed softly. A glass was set down. The warmth of the room was particular. Not the false warmth of a party venue trying to create atmosphere, but something that came from the materials themselves, wood and candlelight, and the smell of real food. What did you decide? I asked. He picked up his water glass, set it down. That you were worth deciding about. I looked at my hands for a moment. When I looked up, he was still watching me, patient, unrushed, as if we had all the time available and he intended to use it accurately rather than quickly. I need to know what you do, I said. I know what you told me. I'm asking for the real version. Something shifted in his expression. Not discomfort, nothing so reactive. More like a recalibration. He looked at the table briefly, then back at me. What do you think you know? I think you came to that party for a reason that had nothing to do with celebrating an investment. I think the 4 men with you were not assistants. I think Denton knew exactly who you were the moment he saw you, and it scared him in a specific way that social embarrassment doesn't account for. I paused. And I think you can make a man stop working with an entire network of agencies with one phone call. He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. Simple as everything else he said. Is anyone in danger because of me? Because you spoke to me? No. Immediate. Certain. Could they be? He leaned forward slightly, the first time I'd seen him close distance voluntarily, and the effect of it was disproportionate to the inch or two it actually represented. I don't allow that, he said. Low. Not threatening. The opposite of threatening. A statement of absolute personal policy. You don't allow it, I repeated. No. His eyes held mine. Not for anything I care about. The food arrived. We let it interrupt us, and when it did, the conversation shifted, deliberately on his part, I thought, into something easier. He asked about the hotel, about what hospitality management had actually looked like day to day, and he listened the way he did everything, with his full attention given completely without being performed. I asked him about Seoul, which he'd mentioned in passing, and he spoke about it with a precision and economy that made every detail land with weight. By 9 o'clock, I had learned almost nothing concrete about him, and felt like I knew him more thoroughly than people I'd known for years. It was disorienting in the specific way of things that don't fit your existing categories. We walked after dinner. His suggestion, or more accurately his statement. I'd like to walk, if you're willing, along the Embarcadero, where the bay lay dark and restless to our right, and the city lit itself up without apology to our left. One of the suited men was somewhere behind us, I was certain, at the distance that had become familiar. The cold came off the water, and I pulled my jacket tighter. Hyun-woo was quiet beside me, which was not absence but presence in another register. "You're going to tell me this is complicated," I said. "It is complicated. And that I should think carefully. You should think carefully." I stopped walking. He stopped a step later, unhurried, precise, and turned to face me. The bay light caught the left side of his face and left the right in shadow, and I thought distantly that this was exactly how he occupied space in general. Partial illumination, deliberate contrast. "I've been thinking carefully for 4 days," I said. "I called on Wednesday." "I know." Something in his voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but with less architecture around it, less deliberate construction. "Is this the part where you tell me to walk away?" He looked at me for a long moment. The water moved behind us. Somewhere a foghorn sounded, distant, one low note absorbed immediately by the city. "No," he said. "This is the part where I tell you that if you stay, I'm not careful about things I decide to keep. I protect them completely, or not at all." His voice was even, but underneath the evenness was something with mass to it, something that had weight and consequence. "That's not a warning, it's information. I want you to have it accurately." I looked at him. At the half of his face the light had claimed and the half it hadn't. "Okay," I said. He studied me. "Okay." We kept walking. His hand found mine somewhere in the next 20 feet. Not dramatically, not with announcement. Simply his fingers closing around mine with the same quality of decision that characterized everything he did. Deliberate, unhurried, certain. I didn't pull away. The city moved around us, indifferent and alive, and the bay kept its cold conversation with the shore. And somewhere behind us, at a careful distance, a man in a dark suit kept watch over something his employer had decided was worth protecting. 3 months is not a long time. It is, however, long enough to learn the specific weight of a person's silence. Long enough to know the difference between the stillness he carried in public, that absolute architectural composure, and the stillness he had in private, which was quieter and warmer and belonged to a completely different country. Long enough to understand that the 4 men who moved around him like a careful orbit were named Marcus, Jin, Theo, and a man everyone called Ray, and that they had accepted my presence in Hyunwoo's life with a professional neutrality that, over weeks, had softened almost imperceptibly into something that resembled protectiveness. Long enough to know I was in love with him, and that knowing it didn't resolve anything. It just changed the shape of the complicated. The complicated had a name, and the name was February. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I was in the kitchen of his San Francisco apartment, a place of clean lines and very few decorative choices, and a window that looked west over the city with the kind of view that makes you feel the world has arranged itself for your benefit. Making coffee at 7 in the morning while he took a call in the other room. I wasn't listening. Then his voice dropped below its usual register, and something about that involuntary shift made my hands go still on the coffee press. I didn't hear words, just tone, and the tone was the one I'd never heard from him. Something with an edge underneath the control, something being managed rather than simply expressed. He came into the kitchen 4 minutes later. "There's a situation," he said. I looked at him. "With Denton." Something moved across his face. "How did you—" "Your voice. When it's business you're comfortable with, your voice is level all the way through. That call had a different bottom to it." I set 2 mugs on the counter. "Is he a problem?" Hyunwoo was quiet for a moment. Not the comfortable quiet. The kind that was thinking. That was weighing how much to give me. We'd had this negotiation before. The ongoing calibration between his instinct to contain information and my insistence on not being protected into ignorance. "He's been making statements," he said finally. "About you. To people in certain circles, attempting to use your connection to me as a way of getting my attention." The coffee press sat between us on the counter. Outside, the city was doing its early morning thing, distant traffic, a gull somewhere, the particular gray gold of a San Francisco February sky. "What kind of statements?" I said. Not a question, a request for honesty. "That you're a liability, that I've made myself vulnerable." A pause. "That someone with access to me could be accessed themselves." I absorbed that. "He's threatening me to threaten you. He's implying the possibility, as leverage. And is it working?" He looked at me across the counter. "What do you think?" I thought about the first night, about the ballroom and the drop tray, and the way he'd appeared beside me without announcement. I thought about the card, the plain card with just a number. I thought about his hand finding mine on the Embarcadero without ceremony or drama, just decision. I thought about what he'd told me on that cold waterfront. I protect them completely, or not at all. "I think," I said carefully, "that you've already decided how to handle it. And I think you came in here to tell me because I've asked you not to manage me quietly." "Yes." He moved around the counter. Close. Not touching. Not yet. Just removing the distance between us until the remaining space was intentional rather than incidental. "I need you to stay somewhere else for a few days. Somewhere Denton doesn't know." "Your somewhere or mine?" "Mine. No hesitation. I have a house in Marin. Marcus and Jin will be there. You won't be alone." I looked up at him. This close, his face was very clear. The lines of it, the particular gravity of his expression when he was being honest rather than composed. "You're not asking," I said. "I'm asking." A pause. "I'm asking in the way that I ask things." Which was, I had learned, with the certainty already present, and the request being a gesture of respect for the other person's agency, rather than a genuine openness to refusal. I had learned to navigate this, the difference between his control being imposed and his control being offered, which sounds like a small distinction, and is in practice an enormous one. "Okay," I said, "but I'm not disappearing from my life indefinitely. I have a shift Thursday." "Cancel it." Hyunwoo. 1 week. His hand came up to my face, one of his rare, deliberate gestures of contact, his thumb at my jaw, the rest of his fingers light at my temple. 7 days and it's handled. I looked at him. How handled? Completely. I believed him. That was the thing about him that had taken me 2 months to fully accept. That his certainty was not arrogance performing as confidence. It was the real thing. The product of a man who had learned exactly what he was capable of and had stopped pretending otherwise. When he said completely, he meant it in a way that had weight and history and evidence behind it. 7 days, I said. The Marin house was nothing like the San Francisco apartment. Where the apartment was spare and deliberate, the house was older, warmer, full of wood, and the sound of eucalyptus moving outside the windows. It sat on a hillside above a small town, surrounded by enough land that the nearest neighbor was invisible, and it smelled like firewood and something herbal I never identified. Marcus and Jin were there as promised, present but unobtrusive, moving through the house with the quiet efficiency I'd come to associate with everyone in Hyunwoo's orbit. Hyunwoo came every evening. He would arrive around 7, change out of whatever the day had required of him, and become a different version of himself. Not softer exactly, but less armored, less structured around the requirements of his world. We ate dinner together at the long kitchen table. He talked more in that house than I'd ever heard him talk anywhere. The words coming in that careful, economical way, but more of them. Stories about soul, about his father, about the particular path that had led from one to the other, which he described without self-pity and without dramatization, and which I listened to with the attention it deserved. On the 4th night he told me about Denton. Not the situation, not the leverage attempt, but the resolution. Denton had been in business with men who were in business with Hyunwoo's network, which meant Denton's threat had not been to a stranger, but to someone inside a system he depended on for his own operation. The men Denton needed had been made aware of this. The statements stopped. The leverage evaporated. Denton was not a problem that required force, only clarity. The specific clarity that comes when a man understands that the thing he threatened is protected by something larger than he'd calculated. "That's it?" I said. "That's it." He picked up his coffee. Men like Denton only move against targets they believe are unprotected. The moment that belief is corrected, they stop. "And if he tries again?" Hyunwoo looked at me over the rim of his mug. "He won't." I believed that too. On the 6th night, a storm came in from the coast, the kind of February storm that takes the hills seriously. Rain against the windows in long lateral sheets and the eucalyptus going sideways in the dark. We stayed by the fireplace until late, and he fell asleep on the couch before me. A thing I had never seen. Hyunwoo asleep, the composure released entirely, his face doing what faces do when they are genuinely at rest. And I sat in the chair across from him with a blanket and watched the fire for a long time. I thought about the ballroom, about cold champagne on carpet, about a stranger appearing beside me and saying she said she's working in a voice that didn't need to be loud to end the conversation. I thought about how much of my life I had spent trying to be invisible, and how this man had looked across a crowded room and decided, for reasons I still didn't entirely understand, that I was someone worth seeing. In the morning I made coffee, and he woke to the smell of it, which I had learned was the only reliable way to interrupt his sleep. And he came into the kitchen with the unhurried movements of a man who had slept well, and found me at the window looking out at the hill, which was clean and bright after the storm, the eucalyptus standing straight again, everything washed. 7 days, I said. He came to stand beside me. Yes. You said 7 days and it's handled. It is. I turned to look at him. The morning light was uncomplicated, and it found him simply, without the fragmented chandelier light of the party, without the bay's cold silver, without candles or strategic shadow. Just light, and him in it, and me close enough that the distance was entirely intentional. "I'm not going back to the agency," I said. "I've been thinking about it all week. The hotel management work. There's a position at a Sausalito property I looked at 6 months ago and didn't apply for because I talked myself out of it." I paused. "I'm going to apply." Something happened in his expression. Not surprise. He didn't do surprise easily. But something that was its cousin, something that looked like genuine pleasure held very still. "Good," he said. "Just that." "I'm also not moving into your apartment," I said. "Not yet. I need my own space. I need to know I'm here because I choose it every day, not because the path of least resistance leads here." "I know," he said. He did know. This was the thing about him, that he understood the shapes of people's needs, even when they complicated his own preferences. "But I'm staying," I said. "In whatever way this works, I'm staying." He reached out and tucked a piece of hair behind my ear with 2 fingers. Deliberate, the way he touched everything, as if he'd decided to do it and done it without apology. Then his hand stayed at the side of my face, and his eyes were on mine, and the morning was very quiet around us. "I know that too," he said. Outside, the hill was still. The storm had passed through completely, as storms do when they mean it, leaving everything it had touched slightly rearranged, slightly cleaner, altered in ways that were small individually and significant in some. The eucalyptus stood in the new light. The sky was the particular blue that only arrives after rain. I leaned into his hand and let myself be exactly where I was, not small, not invisible, not peripheral, in a life that had turned, quietly and without announcement, into something I had not seen coming and did not want to walk back from. He made no move to let go. Neither did I.